So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit about sudden cardiac arrest and emergency action plans. We are never want to talk about these sort of catastrophic injuries or catastrophic events. Obviously, there are some that resonate across our game in a global way, but what we do know is that in that field at night, somewhere in Idaho, somewhere in Montana, that these incidents can occur. And we want to make sure that we provide the right information and the tools that you as a coach, as a player, as a referee, how you can bridge survival in these circumstances when they occur. And we're very fortunate tonight to have Dr. Tim Churchill. He's a sports cardiologist at Mass General in Boston and Harvard University, one of the leaders in the United States. He works with us and our national team players and screening our national team player athletes. So very fortunate to have Tim with us tonight. Dr. Churchill, thank you so much.
Well, thanks, George, and thanks for everybody at US Soccer. I'm really excited to be here. This is obviously a topic near and dear to my heart. This is sort of this one of the central things that I do every day in my research and clinical work, which is to say our goal is to number one, to minimize this happening, and then number two, minimize to help, as we alluded to here later on the slide, when bad things happen, help make sure the right response is in place. And so this is as George said, this is not a topic that anyone ever wants to see, but the unfortunate reality is it happens. It happens in high profile cases that are all over the media with professional soccer players. It happens in our local communities. And so it's something that it's on us as the sports community to be aware of and to help work to prevent and to work to help properly treat when this happens, because this is one of those conditions where seconds and minutes matter. So sudden cardiac death is the term that we use, which can be labeled anything from cardiac arrest to sometimes it gets labeled as someone just collapsing, heart attack, and this is rare, but this is obviously high stakes because this is a fatal event until it's reversed. And for the people kind of from a medical standpoint, what's happening here is the heart is going into a dangerous and what will be a fatal heart rhythm unless it is appropriately reversed. And it's important to note that a sudden cardiac death is unfortunately often can be the first manifestation of some form of heart disease. And in the youth population, this is typically genetic heart disease of one form or another. And that can be structural, problems with the heart's electrical systems. There's all sorts of varieties of that. And this is a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis. Doing this tomorrow is doing various forms of pre-participation cardiovascular screening. That's the PPCS, to try to look in athletes in various contexts, try to look for conditions that would put people at risk for sudden cardiac death, cardiac arrest. And we know that in general, that reduces the incidence of this condition. But what we also know is even in well-screened populations, even when people get the best of testing and the best analysis by the most experienced practitioners in the world, it still happens. Best data on that comes from the UK, where led by one of our colleagues, Sanjay Sharma's group, they sort of spearheaded a national screening and the elite level young soccer players in the various club systems there, and they found this was occurring at a rate of 7 per 100,000, and this is per 100,000 person year. So definitely not trivial, and it's the kind of thing it always feels like it's going to happen to someone else until it happens in our communities. So my goal as a cardiologist, but what I want is for the goal of everybody involved in all youth sports is to turn a sudden cardiac death into what we call an aborted sudden cardiac arrest. And the key for what I'm going to argue and what sort of hope to communicate to everybody is that the key for this is that it requires a careful emergency action plan, which is kind of going to be the subject of the next couple of slides that I have to talk about tonight. So this is This is just a view from a big picture. This is in the sports cardiology world. This is a curriculum document put together by some of my colleagues and published a number of years ago. And I show this just to highlight that in our world and across, and this is a similar thing in many aspects, but in our world, really the two key aspects to treating a sudden cardiac arrest and again to turning it into an aborted sudden cardiac arrest are timely bystander CPR, which is basically we want CPR started, high quality CPR started as quickly as possible, and then continued as long as needed, and then early defibrillation. And so those two are really they work together to try to basically the CPR is maintaining the circulation until the appropriate defibrillation, and defibrillation basically means delivering a shock to help restore the normal heart rhythm. So our job as sports cardiologists is we are members of a team to work with all of you and in our local communities, team docs, trainers, parents, referees, coaches, teammates, et cetera, and in particular to work with all of the organizations that are putting forward that are organizing, hosting, sponsoring, et cetera, any form of competitive sports, and encouraging people to have not only to develop, but also to rehearse, refine, and practice their emergency action plan. So we can go to the next slide, please. So what goes into the emergency action plan? We heard about this in the great talk about concussions earlier, and this is just another side of a similar theme. But what we really want to know is have the key stakeholders, have all of the key information laid out, and really the most important part of that is have that in a way that's digestible for everybody, have that accessible to everybody, and have it be something that people are aware of, have reviewed and practiced. So then when the time comes, it's not a thought process. It's not where is the defibrillator? Where is the AED? It's okay. I'm starting CPR. You're getting the AED, and you're calling 911, and we're moving on this. So components of this. So documentation. We want in a given environment, we would advocate that everything be documented. Who's there? Where different things are? Where the defibrillators are? Where are the exit routes if the paramedics come, et cetera. If it's not written down, it's not necessarily going to be in the front of people's minds. It's not going to be practiced and reviewed, and it's not going to be something that they can do without thinking about. So CPR training, not complex, doesn't need to be fancy, but we want people to understand the basics of that. And this is the kind of thing where as many people as possible that are able to do this training and understand the basics of CPR is just increasing our chances for saving a life. So ideally, this would be something that certainly everybody, all staff member, people working there, but even I would extend this down to coaches, teammates, referees, et cetera, anybody in the sport environment. So AED accessibilities. AED, for anyone unfamiliar, automated external defibrillator. These are the machines that basically do the work of analyze. They analyze what's going on with the heart, and if appropriate, they deliver that shock that can restore the normal rhythm and save someone's life. So what we want is these to be available, accessible, easy to find, and quick to get to the player. So this is a standard less than 2-minute time to player at 100% of training and competition sites. So we want this, if this is a local town field, a high school gymnasium, really anywhere that youth sports are going on, that should really be the standard that we're aiming for. And we're lucky. Well, later tonight we'll hear about a potential opportunity be coordinated via U.S. Soccer to help facilitate that because it's obviously there is a degree of financial investment there. So integration, other components, integration with EMS, emergency medical services. This is the kind of thing we always want to be sure, okay, if we have to call 911, how are they getting onto the field? If it's a stadium, how do they access the actual field? How are they coming in? How are they getting out? Can they bring the ambulance directly on here? And then I think another important thing is what's the chain of command? And this is one where I'll be the first person to say, I'm a cardiologist who specializes in sports, but if there's a cardiac arrest and the paramedics show up, I am stepping to the side and turning over the command of the situation to them, because this is what they do all day, every day. And you don't want the person who had dealt with a cardiac arrest once 15 years ago in their residency. You want them, the people who are doing this all day, every day, to be running the show and in charge. And then the last thing I'll mention here is practice, and then also revision. If this is the kind of thing where you're finding that it takes a long time to get an AED, it may be that we have to reconfigure where they're located. If we're finding that it's not easy to get an ambulance there, we may have to kind of come up with a plan to get better access. So practice, iterating on this, and then revising as needed. So we can go to the next slide. So these are just a couple components, sort of building on the same components. We've defined as steps, working with U.S. Soccer and other organizations as steps to success for this. And the first I'll say is just really, and this builds off of what some of my colleagues said earlier, is really prioritizing this. And this is something that we want buy-in from, and this really shouldn't just be something that the trainer puts forward and kind of makes everybody talk about once a year. This is something that we want the coaches to buy into, and again, down to parents across on the sidelines. And this is a quote from an athlete that had been taken care of in my practice once, who said, "The best coach I ever had was the one who saved my life." And that's the kind of power that anybody can hold in their hands. So CPR training, as I mentioned before, really, there's no reason that any staff member in working with youth sports shouldn't do this. And really, we should really be encouraging it broadly for anybody else. Access to AEDs, also comfort, is the kind of thing where when people get a chance to actually hold one in their hands, practice using it, they realize it's not that hard and anybody can use it. And they're designed to take all the hard work for you and make it as simple as possible. Connecting with EMS, and particularly this is something that we do routinely at big events, but in general, you want to kind of be sure that that's a clear pathway. Practicing. And then again, the document, having this all laid out clearly in a document, reviewing it, revising it. And this is something that you want to be doing on a semi-annual, annual basis to make sure this is front in mind. Because when the time comes, you want this to be reflexive, not something that requires people to stop and think. So I think we can go to the next slide. I think that's all I have tonight. I just wanted to really emphasize these are things. This is, for us as sports cardiologists, this is really as big as it gets, which is we look for and we try to prevent these things from happening, but we can't find them all. We know that even if you give everybody all the fanciest heart tests that I can come up with, bad things are still going to happen. So which is why we rely on all of you to help turn that what would otherwise be a sudden cardiac death into an aborted cardiac arrest. And that's, I think, really the most meaningful thing that I do or that I can be involved in my professional life. And so I thank everybody for their help with that goal.
Dr. Churchill, first of all, thank you so much. There are a few questions in the queue, but I do want to say a couple of things first and foremost. This is very near and dear for myself as well. Mm-hmm. U.S. Soccer has a hands-only CPR training video that's on Recognize to Recover. It is freely available. The intent of it is that every coach, every parent, every player can watch that and have that skill set to be able to save someone's life. It literally takes a team to save a life. It takes someone doing compressions. It takes someone calling 911. It takes someone getting the AED. It takes someone waiting for the ambulance to bring them in there. That video literally is about 4 to 4.5 minutes long. 4 minutes that you can show to every one of your players, every one of your coaches, every one of your parents, and that basically creates a culture of safety for you. I understand that there are some certifications that coaches want to take, and that's separate from this, but that CPR training video is free to everyone. And so everyone also knows it's mandatory. That video is mandatory training for every coach and referee for U.S. Soccer. So we are very fortunate that we train every coach, every referee on hands-only CPR and how to use an AED. At the end of tonight's talk, we're going to have Stryker present to us, to everyone on here, access to cost-effective AEDs for your facility. Dr. Churchill, I do have one question. You talked about screening. There's a question, and I don't think we can get into the details of screening and the need for screening for youth athletes. You touched on it with Dr. Sharma in England, but Do you recommend any additional cardiac testing or monitoring, such as during preseason or return to sport following COVID symptom side effects to reduce the risk of cardiac related events? I know there's been a lot of studies that have given us guidance. If you can maybe answer that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of been the topic that's taken up a lot of the last 2.5 years of my life and my colleagues. And what I'll say briefly is that there's been a lot of work that's gone into this. We've really gradually de-escalated this. And at this point now, we're really honing down and focusing in the specific medical evaluation for people who had what I would call either a very significant and severe COVID-19 infection. So if someone was really quite ill, and I would highlight this as the most important thing that highlights to us is when people return to exercise, and there's a variety of protocols out there in terms of gradually getting people back into exercise after their infection. When they return to exercise, if they have significant exercise associated or exercise induced symptom, and that in particular are things like chest pain or lightheadedness, dizziness with exercise, those are the things that really are prompting evaluation at this point. We're really trying to be guided more by symptoms as opposed to a post-COVID screening approach, and which has been a gradual de-escalation of our work of this sort of the screening type efforts that have gone from the whole kind of kitchen sink of basically every test that a cardiologist has back in 2020 to the approach really guided, trying to individualize it and look based on how someone is feeling as they return back into exercise.
So is it fair to say, unless you've had a severe illness of COVID or been hospitalized, you do not need any cardiac screening? And then if you didn't have any cardiac screening, but you're returning and you're developing symptoms of chest pain, shortness of breath, then you should get evaluated. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's the distillation of that. And obviously if people have been out for the shortness of breath part is tough to sort of say because they've been out for a week. Maybe they had if they had a significant, if they were coughing, et cetera. But we really say kind of chest pain, shortness of breath, that's really dramatically out of proportion to things, are where we start to see people like that. And even in that circumstance, I would say it's uncommon that actual cardiovascular problems are identified, but those are the people that we sort of want to be connecting with. And whether that's someone's a pediatrician or and then if need be kind of into the cardiology world.
Thanks so much, Dr. Churchill. Appreciate it. Thanks for all that key information. Again, Recognize to Recover has EAPs on cardiac issues. Please go there. Thank you so much for that valuable information.
Thanks so much for having me.